All right, here we go. It's time to kick off the official 2023 Uncle Lou College Football Team predictions. These are game-by-game predictions. I'm going to do as many teams as I can between now and the start of the season. Up first this year, the Oklahoma Sooners. Yeah, good morning, Internet. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You can let me know in the comments down below what you think about this video here, but these are detailed prediction videos for, like I said, as many teams as I can do between now and the start of the season. I spend the first half of the video kind of previewing the team itself, the coaches, the roster, what they lost, what's coming back, that kind of thing. Second half of the video, I'll put the schedule up on the screen. I'm going to go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single game, in this case on Oklahoma's schedule. Shout out to Bad Dog over on my Patreon page. I know a lot of you know Bad Dog, but shout out to Bad Dog. He requested this Oklahoma preview. If you are a member of the Uncle Lou Patreon page, make sure you go over there. You will see the post I made at the top of the Patreon page about these prediction videos. Leave a comment. Let me know what team it is you want to see me do a prediction for. That's where I'm getting these teams from. Every day when I sit down in here to do a prediction video, I'm going to head over to the Patreon page and I'm going to pick a team off of that list. So make sure you head over there, find that post, leave a comment, let me know what team you want to see. If you're not signed up on the Uncle Lou Patreon page, what are you doing? There's a link in the description of this video that'll take you over there. Feel free to click that link and check it out. All right, a little bit of general information here about the Oklahoma Sooners to kick things off. I've got Oklahoma ranked 25th in my most recent preseason ranking. I only do 3 preseason rankings. I do one after signing day in February. I do one after spring practice, and then I do another one a few weeks before the season starts, but I haven't done yet, obviously. But I've done the post-spring one. I've got Oklahoma at 25. If you look at some of the national rankings or national preseason polls that are around, Oklahoma generally is in the 20 to 25 range. Some polls, they're unranked or in the others receiving votes, so probably 26 to 30. There's a few polls that have them in the 15 to 20 range, but the majority of the rankings of polls out there have Oklahoma somewhere between 20 and 25. Their win total, according to Vegas, DraftKings is usually where I look for this number, but you can find it anywhere. The expected win total for Oklahoma in 2023 is 9.5. Now, this is for betting purposes, so people say, I can win 9.5 games. You either bet the over or the under. So the over-under for Oklahoma for this year is 9.5. That's how many games are expected to win, at least for those who are willing to put money on it. Heisman odds. Anybody on Oklahoma's team in a Heisman race this year? Well, quarterback Dillon Gabriel is back. We're going to talk more about him in a second. He has plus 3,500 odds to win the Heisman. That puts him around 18th in terms of the odds if you were to go through and add them up. Some other players who are in that same range, just to give you kind of an idea of what the expectations are for Dillon Gabriel from a Heisman perspective. Running back Blake Corum, running back Travion Henderson, and Georgia backup quarterback Brock Vandagriff all have the same or similar odds as Oklahoma quarterback Dillon Gabriel. What about national title odds? Plus 6,000 to win the national title. That's good for 16th. 16th best odds according to DraftKings at plus 6,000. Second best odds in the Big 12 behind Texas. Some of the teams that are around Oklahoma in that plus 6,000 range to win the national title would be teams like Washington, Texas A&M, Utah, and Wisconsin. So just give you kind of a brief idea of what some people out there think about Oklahoma heading into the season. All right, here we go. Oklahoma 2023. Of course, Brent Venables is back for his second year as head coach at Oklahoma, replacing Lincoln Riley, who left unexpectedly after the 2021 season to take the job at Southern Cal. Oklahoma goes out, gets Brent Venables, brings him in from Clemson. Clemson, of course, had one of the best defenses in all of college football over the last decade or so. Dabo Swinney, the head coach, but Brent Venables, kind of the architect of that defense there, defensive coordinator in Clemson for a long, long time. Ties to Oklahoma, obviously. They bring him in as head coach. And to say it didn't go well would be an understatement. It honestly was just a complete failure and a disaster. There's no other way really to describe it. Now, that doesn't mean that Brent Venables is destined for failure as a head coach. Doesn't mean he can't turn it around, whether it be this year or a year or two down the road. But in terms of what we have to go on, what we have to look at so far for Brent Venables as head coach at Oklahoma, it was an absolute failure. 6-7 last year, Oklahoma's first losing season since 1998. Something about that year, 1998, I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe somebody in the comments can remind me why that is such an interesting year. But yeah, 6-7, a losing record for the first time since 1998. 0-5 in one-score games. which is kind of a glass half full, glass half empty type of stat, right? When you're losing every close game you play, to me, that's kind of a sign of maybe some coaching issues. Coaches are tightening up at the end of these games where sort of it could go either way. On the other hand, you look at a season like last year where Oklahoma lost 7 games and you go, well, but 5 of them were by 1 score or less. So we were close. And I think kind of both things are true here for Oklahoma. Brent Venables' first year as a head coach, he's not the first head coach we've seen struggle in close games in his first year as a head coach. I mean, go back and look at some of the more successful coaches in college football. Not all of them, exactly got off to the greatest start year one. So again, I don't think that means anything in terms of how Brent Venables is going to be as a head coach a year, 2 years, or 5 years down the road. But we have to go on the information we have available, and that's just what it is: 0-5 and 1-score games. You figure maybe you try to find a way to turn half of those around in 2023, and instead of sitting there at 6-7, you're sitting there at something like 9-3 in the regular season, or maybe 10-3 if it would a bowl win, something like that, just by turning around half of those 1-score games. Never mind some of the other losses, which we'll get into in a second. But losing record, first time since 1998, 0-5 in 1-score games, and of course just the humiliating beatdown at the hands of Texas, the most lopsided Texas victory in the Red River Shootout of all time. Not good if you're the Oklahoma head coach to be on the wrong side of that, but that's where Brent Venables finds himself heading into year 2. So what's it going to look like on offense in 2023 for the Oklahoma Sooners? Well, we already talked about quarterback Dillon Gabriel. He's back. He had a pretty good season. Last year, threw for a little over 3,200 yards, or right around 3,200 yards, 25 touchdowns, and expected to be pretty good again in 2023. In fact, if you were to rank the Big 12 quarterbacks, he's in the top 2, 3, 4 QBs in the Big 12. Now, some of that is attrition. Some teams lost some QBs, whatever you want to say, but Dillon Gabriel is going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12 in 2023. And offense wasn't necessarily the problem for Oklahoma last year, which is something that Oklahoma fans are kind of familiar with from the Lincoln Riley days. But you averaged over 30 points per game. I mean, that's not terrible. That's not Lincoln Riley numbers. I mean, Lincoln Riley was averaging 40, 45, 50 points a game, but it's respectable. I mean, you were over 30 points a game. As far as what you lose, couple of offensive linemen. You lose Marvin Mims, the wide receiver. So a few holes there to replace on offense. But anytime you got holes to fill or impact players to replace, it kind of makes you feel better knowing you got your starting quarterback coming back at least. He's, of course, kind of the engine that makes everything go when it comes to an offense. When it comes to an offense in college football. Jackson Arnold, who is, I think Jackson Arnold might end up being the best quarterback from this past class. Arch Manning got a lot of the press clippings and a lot of the attention and media coverage and things like that, and for good reason. I think Arch Manning is good too, but Jackson Arnold is really, really good. I don't expect him to play in 2023, at least not any significant time, barring some sort of injury to Dillon Gabriel, or kind of a wheels fall off scenario. If for some reason Oklahoma were to start the season, 2-3, 2-4, 3-6, something like that, maybe you just throw the towel in on the season and Dillon Gabriel and decide to go ahead and start getting Jackson Arnold ready for the following year. I think he's really, really good. I think he's going to be really, really good. Best case scenario, though, I think for Oklahoma and for Jackson Arnold's future would be kind of a backup role this year, maybe get some playing time in the second half of some lopsided games, that kind of thing. But it is nice to know you've got a talented quarterback or a talented backup at the QB position should you need it. You do have to replace Marvin Mims, that wide receiver, like I mentioned, and you bring in a couple of transfers to try to help you out with that. You bring one in from is it Texas? I believe it's Texas and Michigan. You brought 2 transfer wide receivers in. Yeah, one from Texas, one from Michigan. Both of them are going to play. We'll see. Now, Texas has one of the most loaded wide receiver rooms in the country. So the fact that you're getting a wide receiver from Texas who wasn't quite good enough to break into the starting rotation doesn't mean he's a bad wide receiver. Think about Jamison Williams a couple of years ago at Alabama, right? He was buried on the depth chart at Ohio State. Shows up at Alabama, and he's one of the best receivers in the country. Ohio State's got 4 or 5 NFL wide receivers a year. While Texas isn't on that level in terms of year over year, This particular year, Texas is loaded at the wide receiver position. So just because you get a guy from there who couldn't crack the starting lineup doesn't mean he's not going to be any good. Jalil Farouk comes back too. He was kind of your third receiver last year. I guess he's your best returning wide receiver, at least in terms of production. But you're going to have to find one of those three is going to have to step up and become like your go-to wide receiver. That's something that Oklahoma had more times than not under Lincoln Riley. Probably the most shaky or at least questionable wide receiver room that Oklahoma has had heading into a season in quite some time. Again, not saying it's going to be bad, not saying there's not a star or stars in that wide receiver room, but 2 transfers and a guy who was your third option last year, now looking maybe to be your first option. Not really the not the wide receiver room we were used to seeing at Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley, that's for sure. With the running back position, you bring back a couple of running backs who played a bunch last year, Barnes and Sawchuk. I might be saying his name wrong. Again, I don't name these people. It's just my job to pronounce them wrong. But Barnes and Sawchuk come back at the running back position. Again, to me, when I look at Oklahoma's roster offensively, I see just less stars than I saw 2, 3, and 4 years ago under Lincoln Riley. And maybe that's to be expected. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I like Dillon Gabriel. I think he's going to be really, really good. I like Jackson Arnold. He's a future star in my opinion. But you don't have the running backs and the wide receivers, at least in my mind, that you had under Lincoln Riley. Now, to be fair to Oklahoma fans, you say, well, we had all that and couldn't win anything, so we're trading some of that offense for some studs on defense. Okay. That's something I can buy into. That's something I can buy into and believe. I think Oklahoma's got a better chance of winning a national title scoring 35 points a game and giving up 20 points a game than they do scoring 50 points a game and giving up 35, which is what they were doing under Lincoln Riley. Obviously, that wasn't working. Offensive line is going to – Oklahoma's had a great offensive line almost every single year as far back as you can remember, even under Lincoln Riley, however far you want to go back. I think that's going to be the case again. 3 of their 5 starters return along the offensive line, and they get a transfer in from Stanford who's probably going to start right away at left tackle. So you basically have 4 offensive linemen with a lot of starting experience. I think Oklahoma will be fine along the offensive line. All right, and now on to the defense. And again, this is almost unfair to Brent Venables, but the pressure and the expectations that were heaped onto Brent Venables in year 1 by the Oklahoma fans, I think was something that he was never going to be able to live up to. Oklahoma fans have watched their defense the Oklahoma defense has been one of the worst in the country every single year. Not bad, not worst in the Big 12, one of the worst in the country every single year, year after year under Lincoln Riley. You go out and you get what a lot of people think is one of the best defensive coordinators in all of college football with a proven track record of recruiting, developing elite NFL level defensive players at Clemson. You bring him in. He's got ties to Oklahoma. I get the expectations. It could not have gone any worse in year 1, though, for Brent Venables on the defensive side of the ball at Oklahoma. The numbers were absolutely atrocious. And what's surprising to me is, while I didn't expect Oklahoma to become a top 10 defense overnight simply by hiring Brent Venables, I did expect some improvement. I did expect to be able to watch Oklahoma games and see the difference that Brent Venables was making. And I couldn't see that last year. It looked like the same pitiful, piss-poor, pathetic, and sad Oklahoma defense that I'd seen every single year under Lincoln Riley. And I know a lot of the players were the same. But we got to be fair here. This is the age of the transfer portal, all right? I know Oklahoma fans can't stand Lincoln Riley. You wouldn't piss on him if he was on fire, and I get it. But he took over a 5-win Southern Cal team and took them to a New Year's Six game. Damn near made the playoffs. He was 1 win away from making the playoffs, the Pac-12 title game. They ended up losing to Utah. That team was 5-7 the year before. How did he do it? The transfer portal. Not that Brent Venables didn't try, but let's be honest. One of the things we like about Brent Venables is where he comes from, right? Originally Oklahoma, but I mean the time he spent at Clemson, right? Well, what's Clemson's philosophy on the transfer portal? They don't have one. They don't believe in it. And I'm not saying that Brent Venables is going to be a replica of Dabo Swinney in terms of the transfer portal. There were things that could have been done in year 1, I believe, to help shore up Oklahoma's defense that just weren't done. Now, it's no point rehashing all that now. The reality is the defense was terrible. They have gone out and utilized the portal this offseason, both offensively and defensively. So I'm not suggesting that because last year was bad defensively, it's doomed to fail forever. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I also don't think it's fair just to give Brent Venables a complete pass for last year's defense by saying, well, it was his first year and it was a lot of the old players that were left there from before. That's not really a valid excuse in 2023 when you have full access to the transfer portal. So I think Brent Venables has to take some responsibility for how bad that Oklahoma defense was last year and not blame it solely on the players. How bad was that defense last year? Well, they gave up 30 points per game. That's 99th in the country. 99. Total defense, they were 122nd. Again, these look just like the numbers when Lincoln Riley was there. No improvement. And then on top of that, it goes beyond the stats and the numbers. One of my biggest gripes about watching a Lincoln Riley team, out of position players on defense, just a bad overall philosophy, an obvious lack of talent, bad scheming, and it just seemed like a lot of that carried over to Brent Venables' defense with Oklahoma last year. It just was really bad. So all that's the bad news. What's the good news? Well, the defense can't get much worse. That's the good news. You would expect it to get a lot better. Now, here's another one of those glass half full, glass half empty deals. You return almost your entire defense from last year with a few exceptions. So it's good because you're getting back players that not only have experience, but have experience up underneath Brent Venables. So you say, well, they should take a big step forward. Glass half full, you bring back a lot of players from a defense last year that was absolutely horrible. So you can kind of look at it either way. And we're going to have to wait until the season starts to see how that plays out. How much better will Oklahoma's defense be? Now, I think it's going to be better. Just to get that out there, I do think their defense is going to be better. But 122nd in total defense, 99th in scoring, losing to Texas 49-0, giving up 40 points or more 5 times. That's almost half your game. Almost half your games you're giving up 40 points or more. It's just not a recipe for success, especially when the offense, although decent at 30 points per game, is taking a huge step back from where it was under Lincoln Riley. And you knew that was going to be the case. That was the trade-off. We're going to give up some of our offensive production and firepower and stardom and a Heisman quarterback every year. We're going to give some of that up to have a competent defense. Well, you gave up some of the offense, but the defense stayed in the toilet. The defense is going to have to get better in 2023 if Oklahoma wants to go where it wants to go. And let's not forget, Oklahoma's headed to the SEC in 2024. This is a huge year for Oklahoma. Not necessarily that they need to win the Big 12 or make the playoff or win a national title. Obviously, that's the goal if you're an Oklahoma fan. I get that, but you need positive momentum heading into 2024 and your first season entering SEC play, right? In other words, you have to show improvement this season, both in terms of overall record, defensive ability, just across the board. I think that's very important in the last year in the Big 12, getting ready to head into the SEC. You got to have some positive momentum head forward. I mentioned a lot of those players coming back. You got a linebacker that led the Big 12 in tackles last year. He's back. So that's good news. You bring in a linebacker from Indiana that was a freshman All-American. He's probably going to end up starting for you this year. You bring in a couple of different transfers here and there. Most of your defense returns, like I said. So the defense, a lot more experienced than it was last year, second year in Brent Venables' system, and a couple of key transfers. You're hoping that adds up to a much improved defense in 2023. All right, now it's time to put the schedule up on the screen and see what we think Oklahoma might actually do this coming football season in 2023. Now, what I like to do, I think everybody kind of thinks of a team, right? And then you have like a general idea in your head of what that team's record will probably be. Before you look at the schedule, before you look at what they did in the transfer portal, before you look at any injuries or who they lost or anything like that, you just kind of like, Oklahoma add up, they're probably 9-3. That's kind of where I fell with Oklahoma over the majority of this offseason. Hearing fans talk about Oklahoma, the things I would read online about what was going on with recruiting classes and transfers and, how Dylan Gabriel was doing and how Jackson Arnold looked even as the backup, you kind of start to develop just a thought in your head. And the thought that, when I thought about Oklahoma, when I sat down to do this video today, before I wrote anything down, and yes, Uncle Lou makes copious notes in that, back up there now. Uncle Lou makes copious notes in that. But before I did any of that, I just thought about it. What do I really think about Oklahoma? And they seem like about a 9-win team is kind of what I thought. And when you when you look at it that way, you're giving yourself a little bit of a window, right? You say, well, they're probably 9-3. So, ceiling 10-2, floor 8-4, something like that. And then I sat down and I do all the research and, I look these different things up, pull the schedule up. Who do they play? Where do they play them at? Another thing to keep in mind when you're talking about any Big 12 team this season, which is different from all the Big 12 seasons we've had in the recent past, they no longer play a round robin schedule format, right? And this matters because not every Big 12 team's schedule is going to be the same, right? For a long time, there's been 10 teams in the Big 12. They play 9 conference games, which means you play every team in your conference during the regular season. Well, now this season anyway, they've got 14 teams in the Big 12 because they added BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and Central Florida. Well, obviously you can't play all 14 teams. They're sticking with a 9-game conference schedule. So some teams are going to play harder schedules than others based on the draw. And I'll give you an example here with Oklahoma, and maybe you've already noticed it with the schedule up on the screen there. But they do play Texas. They do play TCU. They don't play Kansas State, and they don't play Texas Tech. If you ask most people to name the top 5 teams in the Big 12 heading into next year, if you look at the odds to win the Big 12, if you look at pretty much any write-up on the Big 12, the 5 teams at the top of the league, in no particular order, are Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and TCU. Well, Oklahoma plays 2 of those teams and avoids 2 of those teams. There are some teams that play all 4. Obviously, that would be tougher than only playing 2 of those 4. So you see what I'm saying? So you get an idea in your head, okay, maybe they go 9-3. Then you look everything up. Then you look at the schedule, and then you sort of break it down and go from there. So let's go through it game by game and see, is Oklahoma a 9-3 team? Are they better? Are they worse? Remember, 6-7 last year, first losing season since 1998. You start off with 3 non-con games, and because Georgia backed out, and yes, that's what happened. Georgia's my favorite team, but the reality is Georgia backed out of that game. The whole deal where the SEC made them cancel it, or that the SEC doesn't tell anybody what to do in terms of non-con. Georgia could have played the game at Oklahoma if they wanted to. I understand why they backed out with Oklahoma coming into the SEC. The Georgia and Oklahoma had a home-and-home scheduled. The first one was scheduled at Oklahoma this season, 2023. The second game at home-and-home was scheduled in Athens in 2028 or 2029. Well, that game was never going to be played, at least in terms of a non-con home-and-home, because Oklahoma's coming into the SEC in 2024, so Georgia canceled the game. But Georgia canceled it, so let's not beat around the bush about it. Georgia canceled the game, so Oklahoma kind of got stuck having to backfill that game, and so as a result, they don't have a non-con game against a Power 5 opponent. They play 3 non-con games, all against Group of 5 teams: Arkansas State, SMU, and at Tulsa. Now, SMU's had a couple of good years over the last 4 or 5 years, but that was with Sonny Dykes, who's now at TCU, busy leading them to the playoffs. SMU kind of back to reality after Sonny Dykes left. They were 7-6 last year. So the schedule starts out nicely for Oklahoma. Should be 3 wins, 2 at home to open up the season, then 1 on the road at Tulsa. I know that's an in-state team, and Tulsa would love nothing more than to beat Oklahoma. I don't see it happening. They had a losing record last year. They weren't very good. So I think Oklahoma beats Arkansas State, beats SMU, and wins on the road at Tulsa. They start out 3-0. They sweep their non-con games. And then they run a slate of 9 Big 12 games to close out the season with, of course, a bye week mixed in there too. But first conference game of the year on the road at Cincinnati. There was a lot of kind of conspiracy theories, rumor, innuendo type of stuff going around about whether or not the Big 12 would seek to screw Texas and Oklahoma schedule-wise, since this is the last year they're in the Big 12 and, they're kind of leaving the Big 12 to move to the SEC. I don't think, from what I've seen, it doesn't appear to me that the Big 12 screwed Texas or Oklahoma, like I mentioned. If you ask most anybody to name the top teams in the Big 12, they're going to name those 5 teams: Oklahoma, Texas, TCU, Texas Tech, and Kansas State. Oklahoma plays 2 of them. They don't play the other two. So it seems to me if you're trying to screw somebody, you make them play all four of those teams on the road or whatever. So, but anyway, first conference game is on the road at Cincinnati. Cincinnati made the playoffs a couple of years ago, but their coach is gone, Luke Fickell. He's over at Wisconsin. And even if you look last year at Cincinnati, the year after they made the playoffs when they still had Luke Fickell, they were not nearly the team they were the year before. Cincinnati was something we've seen a few times that year they made the playoff. A group of five team, they don't recruit in the top 10 or whatever, but they get a team that's loaded with veteran leadership and one or two really, really good players on both sides of the ball. They had the quarterback, and then they had two NFL defensive backs, and they had a really good season. They had a 2 or 3 year run with those guys. It was amazing, and that's why Luke Fickell's at Wisconsin now, to see if he can do that there. But they took a step back last year, even with Luke Fickell. Now they have a new coaching staff. First year for Cincinnati ever playing a Power 5 schedule. I think Oklahoma gets the win there on the road at Cincinnati. You'll notice Cincinnati plays 3 of the 4 new teams. They don't play Houston. They do play later in the season at home against Central Florida, and then next to the last game of the year on the road at BYU. We'll get to those in a minute. So they play 3 of the 4 new teams in the Big 12. First one on the road at Cincinnati, week 4. I think Oklahoma gets the win. They start off the season 4-0. They're on a roll. Then they come back home and play Iowa State. Iowa State's another team that has taken a couple of steps back in the last couple of years after having a 9 or 10 win season a few years ago. Oklahoma, as bad as they were last year, beat this Iowa State team 27-13. And that was on the road at Iowa State, which is supposed to be a really hard place to play. So a not very good Oklahoma team went there and won. Now you get that team at home. I think Oklahoma beats them too. You're 5-0 heading into the Red River Shootout with Texas. Unfortunately, I'm not even going to beat around the bush here. I think Texas wins this game. I just think Texas is a better team. Remember everything I said at the beginning of the video about Brent Venables. Nothing that happened last year is proof that Brent Venables is a bad coach, right? We just don't know. You need another year or two before you start to try to figure that out. But what can't be denied is that also, whether you think Steve Sarkisian is a great coach or not, he's 2 or 3 years ahead of where Brent Venables is right now, just by nature of him being at Texas for 2 or 3 years longer. He's established his culture there. He's established his philosophy offensively and defensively. He's turned the roster over and got all of his own players in there, right? Texas is poised to have a pretty good year in 2022. If you just look at the roster and sort of how things are shaping up, this should be Texas's best season in a while. Now, I know we've said that, or certain people or some people have said that about Texas a lot of different years, and it never really seems to work out. I think Texas is going to be a pretty good team. I mentioned earlier they've got one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. I think their defense is going to be better. I think Quinn Ewers is going to have a really good year. They do have to replace Bijan Robinson at running back. But I think Texas is going to be really good. And do I think they're going to beat you 49-0 this year? No. But do I think you're improving enough from last year to beat a team that beat you 49-0 last year? No. I think you lose for the second year in a row to Sarkisian. You're now 5-1. That takes you into your bye week. Come out of your bye week and you play another one of the newbies into the Big 12, Central Florida. Now, I do think this is potentially a dangerous game. I think it's good that Oklahoma has their bye week between the Texas and the Central Florida game, because if I'm right and Texas wins that game, losing a big rivalry game like that is always demoralizing. To have to turn back around and play Central Florida, who technically is a Power 5 team now, right, because they're in the Big 12. But you got to remember, everybody on Oklahoma's team grew up with Central Florida being a group of 5 team, and it's hard to just change the mentality you have about a team overnight. It's like playing Kansas. Like, we know Kansas is a Power 5 team, but it's Kansas. And then every once in a while they sneak up on you and beat you. I don't think Oklahoma's going to lose this game. I think they will win at home against Central Florida. I think it's a good thing this game is at home because of where it falls, being right after that Texas game that I think you're going to lose. But I think you rebound after your bye week and you get a win over Central Florida, still sitting on just the 1 loss. On the road at Kansas, again, a team that you handled last year, 52-42. You'd like to see Oklahoma win this game this year, maybe 42-10. That's really where Oklahoma needs to get. These 52-42 games, they won another one 55-24. That's just, you've seen that with Lincoln Riley, right? I think Oklahoma beats Kansas. It was at Kansas last year. You get them at no, it's at Kansas this year. It was at home last year when you beat them. You have to travel this year and play. And look, I think Kansas will be a decent team. I don't think they're the doormat that they were 3 or 4 years ago. I think they proved that last year. They have a quarterback who comes back. If he can stay healthy, I think he'll have a pretty good year. But Oklahoma ain't got no business losing to Kansas, and I don't think they will. I think you get the win on the road at Kansas, still just with the one loss. At Oklahoma State. Is this Gundy's last year at Oklahoma State? I'll ask the Oklahoma fan. There's a lot of people ask me that. I didn't see last year coming for Oklahoma State. I've been kind of a fan of Gundy, not necessarily his coaching ability. I mean, he's been an okay coach. He seems to have a ceiling, a hard ceiling around 9 or 10 wins and nothing more. But, you know, I've liked his personality. We all remember the, you know, I'm a man, I'm 40 speech that he gave. He grew the mullet out for no reason. He's one of those coaches that is just, as a college football fan, it's been entertaining for me to kind of watch Gundy. But they just completely fell off the rails last year. I don't know that I've seen a collapse like that from a legitimate team. You know, it's one thing to watch Kansas start out 5-0 and then fall off the second half of the season. But to see somebody like Oklahoma State do it, it kind of came out of nowhere. It really took me by surprise that they were that bad for that many games in a row to end the season. In fact, it surprised me so much, it made me wonder, is Gundy interviewing for other jobs? I even wondered out loud, I think I said it on video a couple of times last year, I wonder if Auburn is pursuing Gundy and he just can't get his mind right around these games. Now, that ended up not being the case, but it was just weird to see Oklahoma State struggle that bad under Gundy, something you rarely see. Now, again, Gundy's got the hard ceiling. That's kind of been the knock on him. He wins a certain amount of games and nothing else, but rarely does he just fall off the cliff like he did last year. It was concerning to me. You combine that with some other things that sort of off the field things that happened around 2020 and 2021 with some of the other stuff that went on. I'm starting to wonder if Gundy's time at Oklahoma State is coming to an end. But so I'll ask the majority of you watching, I'm assuming are Oklahoma fans. So I'll just ask y'all, do you think that Gundy's on the way out at Oklahoma State and play this game going forward? This idea that you're going to the SEC means you can't play this game is ridiculous. Georgia plays an ACC team every year, Georgia Tech. They're not in the SEC, but we play them every single year. South Carolina's in the SEC. They play Clemson every single year. Clemson's not in the SEC. They're in the ACC. Florida plays Florida State every single year. Florida's in the SEC. Florida State's not. Doesn't matter. You can play an in-state rival every single year without being in the same conference. I promise it's possible to do. The SEC has been doing it for decades. So this whole thing where, Oklahoma's blaming it on Oklahoma State and Oklahoma State blames it on Oklahoma. I'm blaming both. If this game goes away, it's both of you's fault. Figure out a way to get this thing scheduled in the future going forward. But anyway, I think you win on the road at Oklahoma State. Still just a one loss, and it's at Texas. You come back home, you play West Virginia. West Virginia, I think, is good. Not only going to be the worst team in the Big 12, and I do think they're going to be the worst team in the Big 12. They may end up being the worst team in the Power 5. They're absolutely horrendous. Neil Brown should have been fired last year, but they couldn't afford to buy out, so they brought him back. He will be fired at the end of this year. The West Virginia is absolutely horrendous. Horrendous. You're looking at a 3-win team here. Oklahoma will win that game, no problem. Now, these last 2 games are going to be tricky. On the road at BYU and home against TCU. BYU, and look, I am no fan of BYU. I don't know how many of you watching have been watching this channel for a while, but I'm no fan of BYU, neither their football team or their institution. This guy's secret BYU fan. BYU, even though this is their first year in the Big 12, they are not. This isn't new to them, playing Power 5 teams. They schedule as many Power 5 teams every single year as they can. If they could, they'd play 9 or 10 a year, and they try every year to play 9 or 10, and they play a bunch of them. They're not going to be intimidated. You have to go there. That's a tough place to play. I think BYU beats Oklahoma at the end of the year. I think you play 3 of the new teams. I think you're beating 2 of them. I think BYU is going to catch you late in the year and give you a loss. I think you turn around the following week and lose at home to TCU. I think you finish the season 9-3. I don't think TCU is going to be as good as they were last year. They lose Max Duggan, which was like the comeback king of the world. Quentin Johnston at wide receiver. They lost their offensive coordinator to Clemson. In no way do I think TCU is going to be what they were last year. In fact, I think Oklahoma probably finishes with a better record than TCU. But I think you catch a couple L's at the end of the season. Now, let me say this real quick. Well, let's go back to BYU real quick, and then I'll kind of wrap some things up here. BYU's no stranger to these big games. They are going to want to win a couple of big games their first year in the Big 12 to kind of prove that they belong. Another thing to keep in mind, every single road game that Oklahoma plays, and Texas too, is going to be an extremely hostile environment. A lot of boos, a lot of get out chants. You're leaving for the SEC. The other teams aren't happy about it, that whole deal. It's going to make it's just going to make the environments that much more difficult to play. And I think BYU catches you at the end of the year. I think TCU catches you as well. You finish 9-3. Now, let me say this. I would not at all be shocked if you beat TCU. I would not at all be shocked if you beat BYU. You're probably better than both of those teams. I'll admit that. You're probably better than both of those teams. Now, almost every single team in the country loses at least one game a year that they're supposed to win. So it wouldn't be a shock either if you lost one of those two games. You lost a couple of games last year that you had no business losing. It happens to everybody, right? But 9-3 really does seem like the right record here for me on Oklahoma. So let's say you win one or both of those games at the end of the year. You beat BYU or you beat TCU. What are the other potential losses that I think you're going to win? Well, Iowa State puts together a good season every 2 or 3 years. Will this be that year? Is there a way you lose that game at home to Iowa State? Again, I don't think so. I picked you to win, but I think that's a possibility you at least have to consider. Central Florida is the other one. Central Florida, Gus Malzahn is their coach. He's Power 5 coach forever at Auburn, knows what he's doing. You get him after a bye week, but if things go bad against Texas, how much of that carries over into that Central Florida game? I don't think you lose to Central Florida. That's why I picked you to beat them. But I think you have to at least consider the possibility that could potentially be a loss. I don't really see any other losses on here. I don't think there's anything that could happen to cause you to lose to Kansas or Oklahoma State or West Virginia. I think those are probably the 3 worst teams in the Big 12, and you play them back to back to back. Now, 2 of them are on the road. It sometimes can be tricky to play back-to-back road games. But if you told me I had to play back-to-back road games in the Big 12 and I could pick the 2 teams, those are probably the 2 I'd pick, or maybe West Virginia. But, Kansas and Oklahoma State I just don't think are going to be very good. And then, of course, your non-con schedule, because Georgia backed out on you, kind of is what it is. I don't see you losing any of those. 9-3 seems like the right record for me for Oklahoma. I think 10-2 obviously is very possible for Oklahoma. I do not think Oklahoma's winning the Big 12 this year, and I don't even think Oklahoma plays for the Big 12 title this year. I'll kind of tell you over time as I do more of these previews who I think ends up playing for the Big 12 title, and then eventually I'll get to letting you know who I think actually wins the Big 12. But I think Oklahoma is going to be a really good team. I think they springboard forward compared to last season as they get ready to enter the SEC in 2024. I think right now, some idiot like me telling Oklahoma that they're going 9-3 or 10-2, but not winning the Big 12 obviously isn't what the Oklahoma fan wants to hear. But once the season is over and you look back and you say, you know what, we went from 6-7 to 9-3 or 10-2, whatever it is. It's definitely a step in the right direction now. To me, almost more important than the record is what this defense looks like this year. A lot of these defensive stats from last year need to be cut in half. The points per game, it needs to be cut in half. It needs to be closer to giving up 15 points a game than 30. 99th in scoring defense, you need to be top 50 in scoring defense. 122nd in total defense, you need to be top 60 in total defense. You've got to start moving that direction defensively, or you're never going to get your head above water in the SEC. I'm just telling you. And Oklahoma fans can get mad. You can say whatever you want. And I've been very positive and supportive about Oklahoma's chances coming into the SEC. Right now, to me, it looks like when Oklahoma comes into the SEC, they're going to be about somewhere between the 5th and 6th best team, somewhere in there. I think if you're being realistic right now and you're looking at Oklahoma's transition to the SEC, you got to put Georgia ahead of Oklahoma right now. Got to put Oklahoma ahead of Alabama right now, LSU, and Tennessee. I think those 4 teams right now are definitely ahead of Oklahoma. I think Texas is ahead of Oklahoma. That's 5 teams that are definitely ahead of Oklahoma. They're going to be in your same conference in 2024. This is something that Oklahoma's not used to. Oklahoma's used to being the top dog in their conference, maybe number 2 behind Texas. At least initially, when you transition into the SEC, you're going to be 5th, 6th, or 7th. That's just the way it is. You're going to have to fight your way up the hill like everybody else does. But I think winning 9 or 10 games in 2023 is a huge step in the right direction and some positive momentum for that move to the SEC the following year. All right, there you go. That is my official game-by-game prediction for the Oklahoma Sooners. I've got them going 9-3 with losses to Texas, BYU, and TCU. As usual, don't forget to let me know down below where I'm wrong. Don't just tell me that my record is wrong. If you tell me they're not going 9-3, they're going 10-2, tell me which 2 teams they're losing to. Maybe you think Oklahoma's going to be bad again and go 7-5. Tell me which 5 teams you think they're losing to. Anyway, I appreciate you watching the video. Do me a favor, share this out somewhere on your social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, whatever you do. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already, and I'll be back tomorrow with another official Uncle Lou prediction. Have a good morning.